now officially welcome to the discussion. The topic of today's discussion is youth, democratic values, institutions, and processes. So this online event is part of the Hurford Youth Fellowship program, and I, as part of the Youth Fellows in the spring 2021, am focused on a particular thing related to democracy and young people. So my main topic is systematic approaches to building democratic values among youth, and this panel discussion is the first product, let's say, from that. So my name is Stefani Spirovska, and I'm a Hurford Youth Fellow at the World Movement for Democracy within National Endowment for Democracy. And in the next 60 minutes, I will be moderating today's discussion. With us, we have 3 speakers, although we were supposed to have 4, but one of them had to cancel due to reasons he couldn't postpone. So we have Margarita Maira. She is a youth activist from Chile. She is also a former Hurford Youth Fellow and currently involved in the processes of constitutional changes in Chile through her social engagement. We also have Lala Touré. She is a youth activist from the Gambia. She is a youth leader and supporter of young people, and she is a former political youth wing member of a political party. The third speaker we have today with us is Grigor Yertisyan. He is a youth activist from Armenia. He is a leader of a youth organization called Armenian Progressive Youth and also a member of his city council. I'm sure that we will have a fruitful discussion. We will hear many experiences, and what's the most important thing for me is that we will learn a lot, be inspired, and enjoy while listening to our speakers. Before I give the floor to the speakers, I wanted to share 2 different experiences regarding the position of young people into different areas of the world, let's say. So we have one experience from Bolivia. It's from a book I came across during this fellowship, and it says a lot about the picture of young people in Bolivia and how they lack to be included within decision-making processes. There was a particular part I really liked. It said that young people are present and are very capable to bring about the socio-economic and in general democratic developments, but unfortunately the system doesn't really invest in them and in their capacities. Isabel Mercado is the writer of this book, and she also depicts how young people are economically supporting their families, and due to this they're not really able to continuously socially participate.
I think the show is just complicated. You have to come up with new lyrics to
continuously participate in political processes, especially because they have to dedicate their time on supporting their families. Young people consist more than 28% of the population in Bolivia, and as Isabel highlights, they're usually perceived as an equal part from the governments before the election processes. That's, I'm sure, similar in a lot of places. And at the end of the day, their relationship with the political leaders is rather instrumental. So they're being consulted when it serves to the process rather than to the young people. I would like also to share an insight from the Macedonian picture that's similar to this. In some manners, maybe different, but more or less we have plenty of work to do also if we want to have seriously involved young people and engaged and participatory youth. So in order to effectively represent young people in Macedonia, in North Macedonia actually, especially in the institutions, we still lack equal treatment to the young people and their more experienced colleagues. So for instance, whenever there are elections, young people are always put lower on the list in comparison to their more experienced colleagues. And also, when it comes to trust in international institutions, over 80% of young people, this is a research from the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, which says that over 80% of young people do not believe that institutions take care of them and take their best interest when creating policies or bringing decisions. So even though sometimes young people are consulted, the implementation of their recommendations is significantly low. And this is a thing we need to work on a lot if we want to encourage young people and make them feel as an equal part. And the last thing I would like to share about the North Macedonian picture and young people within democratic processes is the law on youth participation and youth policies. Recently, for the first time, the country got its law on youth participation and youth policies. And we're still about to see what the results from this law will be. So these are just two insights from different parts of the world targeting young people, democratic processes, and how young people are being included. And what will follow now in the discussion from this moment on are many experiences of how young people who were included in the process tried to make things better and tried to improve their democratic surroundings. Without further ado, I would like to give the virtual floor to Margarita Maira. And let her tell us a little bit more about now is the time for young people to participate and what were the experiences of the constitutional changes, what was particularly the role of young people within this process, and how are they in general advancing the democratic processes in Chile. Margarita, please go ahead.
Thank you, Stefani. Yeah, so I come from Chile, down south in the last tip of Latin America. And we've had quite a history of young people being protagonists of our history. So I just want to bring that up because I think it's important to understand that we have a sort of tradition of young people starting new movements, moving things around, asking for things, advocating for causes, and that's had its effects in my country in the past few years. And I just want to mention two very specific things from the past decade because it's recent history. 10 years ago, actually now, in 2011, we had a huge student movement here in Chile. And it was known worldwide because they really changed how the whole country saw our institutions. So students had huge debts, and education here is not very high quality, unfortunately. The system, well, there's a lot that can be done, and the students organized in a movement to ask for that, to ask for those changes to actually happen for once. And they, I mean, I'm gonna just say the highlights because I know a lot about this, and this is not the topic of this discussion, but they basically pushed the limits of what was possible, and they convinced through dialogue, through demonstrations, but also through dialogue and with their ideas and with their organization, they convinced the decision makers, the political powers, parties, to have an educational reform here in Chile. And it was a huge thing. It was a whole year of mobilizations. And then the reform came about when the new president was elected, and she included that in her program. So she basically listened to the streets and said, this is important and we're going to do this. And then after that, the whole second thing I want to mention is in May 2018, we had what we call the Feminist May here in Chile, when all over Chile in universities, girls, students, female students started protesting because of different kinds of abuses within campus. Basically, many cases came to the public light about abuse from scholars, from teachers to their students. It was horrible. But then we realized that we had a problem as a country where girls don't feel safe going to study in universities, and then we discovered also in schools. So there were many protests. Most universities were paralyzed for the whole month because women took the universities as a movement, and then the whole of there were debates about this, and I think they managed to make the rest of the country conscious. They made the country aware of this reality that, I mean, if you were not on campus, you probably didn't know about it, or even if you were on campus, maybe you didn't know about it. So two big things that happened coming from young people in Chile, and that is the background for 2019, when we had what we call the blow up here in Chile. It was a huge social movement. In some way, it is still going on, in the sense that people came out to the streets. We were protesting because of we want more social justice. We want better welfare for our citizens, and this was massive. It happened all over the country, in every city in Chile, and we had people protesting on the streets, dancing, lots of culture. It was beautiful. We also had many what we call in Spanish the cabildos. It's when we come together and we talk about the future and what we want. It's like an assembly in a way, and that started happening in the neighborhoods, in parks. People came together, neighbors met each other, because we were basically very individualistic before that, and then the sense of community started growing. And all of this, which was huge, and I encourage you to read about it, because I don't want to use too much time now. All of this started because high school students made it possible. So the public transport fare had gone up. This affected mainly working class people and people with their pensions, old people with their pensions, who don't really have enough money to last till the end of the month. This is a big problem that we've been having here in Chile. It's become worse with the pandemic, but back in 2019, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back, and they just couldn't afford to have more expenses, basically. And for some reason that we need to analyze as a country, it was their kids, it was their sons, their daughters, their grandchildren who went out to the streets and said, this is not tolerable, because our families cannot deal with more expenses. We need to take care of our grandmas, of our grandpas, of our parents, and we need the government to not do this, not raise the public fare right now, public transport fare. And the government didn't want to do that, so they stuck to the fare. And then the students, one day, and this is when the whole blow up started, they jumped the turnstiles in the metro stations, in the subway stations, and that was like a big sign of peaceful civil disobedience that said to the whole country, we need to change things. We need to have a different kind of relationship here between decision makers and citizens, because we are really asking for something that sounds reasonable, for the public fare not to go up. The government didn't explain really why they were doing it either, so I guess there was a political communication issue as well. And then that's how this whole thing began. And it started with them jumping the turnstiles, high school students jumping the turnstiles. And then the whole of Chile followed, and we went out to the streets and we had all these demonstrations that I was mentioning. And then 1 month later, when the whole country was pretty paralyzed during that whole month, because people couldn't get to work, it was hectic times really, but it was beautiful. I mean, it was nonviolent. It was creating community, as I said. And then 1 month later, all of the political parties came together and decided to find a democratic way out for this. And they saw that the one big place where these changes for a better quality of life, for better welfare, for better social justice, the big thing, the big barrier that was stopping these things from happening was our constitution, which was created during the dictatorship here in Chile. We had a long dictatorship under Pinochet, And it was in those times that they drafted the constitution that we have right now here in Chile. So it is not made for the people, really. So it's an undemocratic constitution. So it's basically a group of men, most of them military, wrote this. Politicians and military wrote it, and it was not thinking of the well-being of Chile. So political parties came together, and then now we are in the middle of a constitutional process because of students jumping the turnstiles. And at this moment, we are about to choose the people who are going to the convention. So they're going to be elected representatives for that. And then they will draft it, and then we will have a plebiscite. We had a plebiscite last year to decide if we were doing this. Do you want a new constitution or not? It was a huge success. There was 80% of the country in favor of having a new constitution. And now we are going to choose the representatives who are doing who are going to draft it, and then we're going to have a plebiscite at the end to choose. So all of this was begun thanks to the students, high school students, jumping the turnstiles, and they cannot vote, unfortunately, because here in Chile we vote from 18 up. So high school students are not going to be able to vote. They couldn't vote in the plebiscite. They're not going to be able to vote for the representatives. But we are working to find ways to include their voices in the drafting of the constitution through participation mechanisms. So that is what we are advocating for right now here in Chile in my project called It's Our Turn to Participate. We are looking for ways, we're drafting proposals for how it could be done for students and other excluded groups who are never listened to in the political processes. How do we make this new constitution different from how decisions are being made in Chile historically? So we are optimistic. We think we might have some mechanisms, some participation mechanisms to gather that information, especially from students who are so important to start this whole process. So that's what we're doing right now, and I hope we manage to have some good participation mechanisms when they start drafting the new constitution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margarita. I think that you opened many questions with everything you shared, but especially about how aware young people are of things that are happening directly or indirectly to them when it comes to their families and when it comes to social injustice. And I will get back to this the topics a bit later on. I think that we're losing Lala from the chat, but she will be back in the call once she has more stable internet. So now we'll do a change and we will give the floor to Grigor. When I did the introduction, I mentioned that he is actually part of the civic sector, but also he works in direct representation of youth people, young people interests within the institutions. So it's not a new practice of having someone from the civic sector to become part of the institutions and then see how the things work on the other side. So Grigor, please go ahead. Let us know a little bit more about your day-to-day work, but mainly about your motivation and how you are trying to advocate for young people on your local and national level. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me. A lot that has been told by Margarita actually could resonate with us as well, except that here in Armenia, we unfortunately did not have this culture of participation among young people and traditional participatory structures. This is rather new in the last 30 years after the collapse of Soviet Union, when Armenia finally became an independent country. And of course, there have been fragmental movements, student movements, voluntary movements, civic initiatives on different causes that were sometimes successful, sometimes not. But the really huge youth movement that I'd like to talk about today actually happened in 2018, when Armenia went through a peaceful transition that we later called a Velvet Revolution, because it was youth-led, peaceful, and non-violent. Though there is an anti-democratic backlash all around the world, and the tendency of democratic retrenchment still exists, here in Armenia, young people, young students managed to basically, through demonstrations, through protests, topple a decade-long regime, autocratic regime of the Republican Party, and brought a democratic and young government in place. This happened in 2018. Armenia, of course, was never, after the independence, a dictatorial country. It was. It has inherited a lot of autocratic tendencies from the Soviet Union, but it was rather semi-democratic, where we had partly freedom of speech. We had elections, well, most of them were falsified, of course, but still there was the electoral process and party politics, some structures of youth participation as well, more or less free media, quite free internet. And because of the free internet, I guess it was easier to mobilize young people around the revolution. So in 2018, what has triggered the revolution here? For about 10 years, we had a single party ruling the country, which basically failed in most of the areas of policies, increased level of poverty, brain drain among young people, economic monopolies and oligarchy supported in all the economic sector, indoctrination of education, militarization of the country, increasing youth unemployment and educational quality, less and less of quality in the higher education and public education. So this was one part of the trigger, and another part of the trigger was that through constitutional changes, the government wanted to reproduce itself for another unlimited term, basically going from presidential republic to a parliamentary republic and reproducing the power forever. And this was exactly the point when young people said, this is not acceptable anymore, and we are not going to let another decade be lost from our future. And basically, a huge movement among students started. For months, all the roads and streets in the country were closed. The transport did not operate. A lot of creative, non-violent, civic disobedience activities took place all across the country, with the metro being shut down, the airport being shut down, the TV company, and all this without any bullet shots, without any violence. So the main idea of the whole movement was that it is non-violent, it is peaceful, and we will finally reach a peaceful transition, which eventually happened after several weeks of protests, and the government decided to resign entirely, which put an end to 30 years of semi-communist, semi-authoritarian, and very patriarchal and ageist government, I would say, which totally changed the way how the society views young people. Since then, a lot of young people, including myself, who were from civil society, in a way transitioned also to politics, which before then seemed a very immoral and dirty place to go, because here politics was not really attractive for young people who don't want to do different dealings and, you know, be in a corrupt system. A lot of young people went to the parliament, to the government. Myself, I got elected to our capital city council, where I represent my constituency and young people. I am involved in the Commission for Education, Culture, Youth, and Social Affairs, where I'm also trying to push forward the ideas of the revolution, basically. More youth participation, more say in decision-making processes, more engagement in decision-making processes, elevated engagement in economic, social, and cultural domains of young people. Still also being part of a civil society organization, actually. So I am having these two identities, leading a youth organization on one side, and also being politically active at the city council. And I am trying to bridge the experiences from civic sector, now having also leverages in the political areas. I would say after the revolution, we thought that it's going to change within a night, but of course, changes, especially after such a heritage, do not come easily. So it's a huge struggle to reform education system, youth participation structures, the government structures, public administration, to make decision-making processes more transparent and participatory. Also, basically to develop the understanding that citizens' participation is important. It should be nurtured, because for many, the decisions have been always made behind the closed doors, and the people never participated in them. So it's a new thing. On the other side, there is a freedom of speech currently, and many of the citizens are not aware where the free speech ends, how to basically behave in the social media, how to identify fake news, how to be media literate, and develop this online hygiene. This is another challenge we're dealing with. Another is to create participatory platforms where actually citizens can have a meaningful say in the decision-making processes, not only a decorative participation, but a meaningful one where people, different ages, different groups are represented through formal and non-formal structures. So this is a current struggle that we are having at the moment. There has been a lot of disappointment, I have to say. People expected to see the change immediately. Then the COVID came, of course, and we saw that a lot of institutions do not function. Then in 2020, unfortunately, Armenia was engaged in an armed conflict with its neighboring country, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, which affected a lot the whole spirit of the revolution, because Armenia had to fight basically two dictatorships with no resources, with no, military possibilities, which drastically impacted the country, and also how people think about changes that happened in the revolution. Now, among the society, also among young people, there is a belief that democracy actually weakens the countries. In the dictatorial regime, you can see that decisions are made easily. You don't have to go to the parliament and get things voted, and democracy is slower. So people want to see quick decisions, strong leaders, and certain leaders who take responsibility for what happens, and not, a lot of people sharing the responsibility for decision-making processes. So many people would say that, with the democracy, with the democratic government, now there is a lack of control. The police is not in the place. There is less of a justice, etc. And a lot of conservative and anti-democratic organizations and parties also financially support these type of narratives in the society. And currently there is this effort to reverse the path, the democratic path that Armenia has been taking. But the good news is that it's not that easy, because once people have felt the power of their voice, once they have seen that with their action, they're able to change the history, they will never agree to reverse the path and to be back to the times when you had zero say and everything was decided for yourself. And especially young people feel ownership for these changes. And also we see that a lot of older generations now criticize young people for all these changes that happened. And all the failures in the administration are associated with lack of experience, being too young, having no public office experience in the past. But what I often say, young people can definitely learn and get experience, but what our older generation cannot do, they cannot unlearn practices and values which they have inherited from the past, favoring corruption and nepotism, favoring ageism everywhere, doing favors, and making decisions behind the closed doors. I don't know if I still have time, actually, because I can go for hours and hours. This is a topic very close to my heart, because, well, this probably was the biggest event of my life and of my life as a citizen. So there are a lot of stories that could be told, but I will probably stop here. And then if there are some questions, I will be very glad to come back. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Grigor. I really see the similarities like that you mentioned about how do older generations function and what are their priorities and what do young people expect, and if they're how disappointed they are, I would say. Speaking on that, which is very similar to what the two of you mentioned, is also the student movement that happened in North Macedonia. That was 2014 it started. So that was sort of the start of changes here as well. And I think that the young people democratic views are usually a result of the support of the society they get, the policies created for them, but also of the education they get. So for instance, if you raise generations teaching them that they should be humble to the government, as we had that up until several years ago, then you cannot really expect proactive young generations and people who are going to move the society to go forward. It was I can agree that the changes take a lot of time to happen and to see the results, because even though we have seen, and when I say we, I mean in North Macedonia, we have seen several, one big political change of the government and then plenty of changes within the system. But anyway, we are still waiting to see the results because it takes a lot of time, especially when it comes to creating young people who are going to, or encouraging young people to be active in their societies, within their schools, within their cities, and later on creating a critical mass that is going to be monitoring the decisions of the decision makers and also of the work of the institutions. There was one also good example that I'm more focused on within my project, and it's the Youth Caucus within the National Youth Parliament, which is a new thing for us because it was created in the previous in the previous parliament before the last elections we've had, and it started working, let's say, 3 years ago, I would say. It is a good thing. It is a new and very important step we have seen here, but we still need to learn how to cooperate with it. So, for instance, the youth club exists. The Youth Caucus within the National Youth Parliament exists. but they lack institutional memory. So when the new people came within the Youth Caucus, they didn't know where their previous colleagues stopped. So things like that are happening, and it's up to us to mark them and see how we can help them improve, actually. We are still waiting for Lala to see if she solves her internet problems, but I think that we will continue with the questions also from the people present here in the audience, and also for what I've been writing down while I was listening to you. So I welcome everyone who has a comment to make or a question to ask to either raise your hand, either text us in the chat, whichever is more comfortable to you. Just let us know who is your question or comment for, so that we can address it accordingly. I think that we can go with Nish. I see him raising his hand. Nish, please go ahead.
Thank you, Stephanie. It was wonderful to listen Margarita and Grigor, right? I don't know like how to pronounce. I guess Grigor, yeah. So it was like really amazing, you know, like how young people are taking the streets, engaging in the movement, and then trying to, you know, kind of change the situation in several parts of the world, including your countries, and also like similar kind of movement is happening. Actually, it has to like stop through because of the COVID-19, same as of Chile, but like it's going, and I think it's a good news, or I think a hopeful future for generation to come, because if we can make change in the institution or make a transformation in the policies, then there is certainly a better future. When I was listening to Grigor, so one of the line he said, the democracy is slower, right? So this sentence actually like, you know, touched my heart, because like I also like hear this kind of sentence from a lot of Nepali people. Oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm actually I'm Nis from Nepal. So yeah, so in Nepal also we hear a lot of such kind of sentence, because like before 2006 we used to have autocratic regime. We used to have monarch system, but after 2006, slowly like people started like, you know, the parliamentary system began, and then like a kind of like, you know, kind of what do you say, kind of domination from neighboring country, or power play from neighboring country. China and India is like growing, and people feel like now like our more like sovereignty is on threat because of democracy. I would like to know from you, Grigor, like what do you say to those people who say such statement? You know, how do you convince them that democracy is the ultimate tool for justice, for peace, for stability, for development? What do you say? And like I also want to relate a little bit, like, you know, what is the chance of getting a kind of illiberal democratic leaders who use the tool of democracy? Because when the people like when the sentiment of people gets attracted towards autocracy, then the leader who rises with the democratic power, you know, try like once he or she gets to the power, then they like try to, you know, increase their power, and then act more like illiberal, you know, introduce illiberal policies in the country. So do you have any like what do you say, kind of what say do you have on this this thing? That's my question. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very difficult task, actually. me being a leader of a youth organization that is promoting democratic values and the understanding of those values among young people and the general population, we're always looking to find new ways, innovative ways of explaining to the people why democracy is important. Unfortunately, most of the people have only two things to compare with one another. It's a democratic country that we live in now, and it's a country that they lived for ages, 70 years of Soviet domination, for example, where there was no freedom of speech, there were no rights, one single party system, but there was an economic stability, free education and free healthcare, which currently they don't have. So the answer from especially older generation would be, well, we used to have a dictatorship with our fridge full, while we have a democracy now with our fridge empty. So that doesn't make much difference to us. And this is very unfortunate what they say, but this is also reality, because when our country found itself in the capitalistic world, then people who were used to getting free services, free education, healthcare, traveling around the world without any borders, are currently locked in the country with conflicts all around, with lack of economic opportunities. And I can understand why my parents' generation thinks that way. I cannot understand why young people actually think that way, because for many of the young people, the world is open again. Many of us have opportunities to study abroad, unlike in the past when we could travel only within the USSR. Well, my parents and not us. We can get a more quality education, though it's not for free, and more quality healthcare services, though we have to pay for them. And unfortunately, like in many socialist countries, we don't have yet, for example, mandatory health insurance. So we have to pay for our health. We don't get a lot of state-funded scholarships to study. You have to be really an excellent student to qualify for a scholarship. And then there are very few places. So we are still in the middle of this democratic transition where a lot of institutions are not there. And because people have never experienced a democracy that works, most of them think that, well, it doesn't. So we try to promote it through different programs, projects, capacity building programs for young people, leadership schools, media literacy schools, creating economic opportunities for youth development, for example. But we are not as powerful as the anti-democratic forces, let's say. One of the main, fake or how to say, thesis that this anti-democratic parties and political groups are spreading is that democracy is actually a Western idea, which is against the traditional values of an Armenian society, against the patriarchal values, etc. This is one of the points. Another of the point is that many civil society organizations are funded by the Western organizations or governments. So one thesis that is being a lot spread is that, well, these organizations are bringing foreign and Western values into the society, which have nothing to do with the local people and local culture. And democratic parties and democratic forces in the society are discredited, and a lot of money is put in the media to discredit them. The Open Society Foundations, for example, or so-called Soros office, everyone is being associated with the Soros office, and the word Soros is like a curse word here. So each of us that works in the civil society, we're associated with the West, with foreign values. So it's very difficult to actually fight all these narratives when you are a small organization. But as the current government is liberal and democratic in a way, they are also trying to fight all these narratives, not that successfully, I would say, but they are also trying to do it. And I very much hope that there will be no return to the previous way of government, and we will not take the democracy for granted. We forget very quickly all the benefits we have now that we didn't have in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Grigor, so much. Because I see that we're very close to the end of today's discussion. I see two more raised hands, and if that's okay with you, we can give space for those questions, and then maybe you would like to reflect also on each other's experiences that we've heard so far. So we can go with these two additional questions, and each one of you would have time for the closing speech, I would say that. Patricia and then Nina, we can go in that way.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm Patricia Zanella from São Paulo, Brazil, one of the Hurford Fellows too. And as a Brazilian, I would like to know if in your countries, based in your experience, how are you leading to overcome the extremist movements led by youths? Because here, for example, we have a lot of right extremist movements, and the youths are working with these ideas because of a lot of fake news and disinformation. So how maybe can we organize us better online in a way to bring more results and help these youths to bring to the democratic force?
Thank you so much, Patricia. Now we're going to Nina, and then we can use the rest of the time for answering these questions. Nina, please go ahead.
Thank you, Stefani. Thank you for the speeches and for introducing us to the democratic processes that are happening in your countries. My question is to Grigor. I can say that, as Stefani mentioned, we were in a very similar situation where after big, long protests, the government changed, and we thought that we got a very open-minded, a very a government that supports the youth and youth questions. And I also heard that you are now both in the government, involved in the government processes, but also involved in the NGO sector. And now my question is, I'm sure that there are many advantages coming from the NGO sector now being in an institution, in a government institution. But in my opinion, the NGO organizations are like a checkpoint for the institutions. Like they're the connector between the civil society and the institutions. And how do you think that? Do you think that you have like maybe be biased, some bias coming from an NGO sector now in the institution, now towards seeing the NGO sector, and having these NGOs being the police of the institutions? Do you think that there is some clash of interests there? And has it happened to you yet? And how do you think that this new government will try to overcome that possible clash that maybe will happen in the future, as it has happened in our country?
Thank you so much, Nina, for the questions. I think that we don't have any additional questions. The thing that I wanted to ask you, and maybe you can sort of include this in the closing speeches, is regarding the current situation with COVID. So do you think that it's sort of slowing the processes that you are involved in, and how much time do you will need to get back on track of what you've already started? Maybe that would be the last question I have. Margarita, I think we can start with you now, and then we will give time to Grigor. Please go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so I would like to try to answer Patricia's question. It's not easy. Actually, my first answer is we are not dealing with extremist movements and figures here in Chile, unfortunately. But they are, and they are a big threat. I mean, we have on both extremes of the political range people here who are raising as in popularity. They're one of them. They're both presidential candidates, actually, in the far right and the far left, and they are very populist, especially in the person I'm thinking about in far left. She's a woman who's a current congresswoman, and she's top in every poll right now, and she does not respect democracy at all. But she's very, she's very intelligent, because what she does is she includes in her narrative and in her speeches all of the things that the people of Chile are suffering for. So everything I mentioned earlier, social injustice and all those more elevated things, if you want. And also now with the pandemic, people are just, many families have gone poor. People cannot go to work, they can't find work, and the pandemic has made things a lot harder for everyone in the world. And here in Chile, we are seeing that the government has not done a great job either. So she's basically tapping on all the issues that are really close to people's hearts right now, and people love her because she's the only person in politics who listens to people. She does it to just go up in the polls, but it's a good strategy. And I think the big way to deal with that is giving the space to be for the rest of the people, for Chileans to raise their voices, to say their opinion, to ask for the things that they need. And I think that's why I think participation mechanisms are essential in the drafting of the new constitution here in Chile, because we need to open up the spaces and have people be a part of decision making. So that is how we can do, like try to deal with that, and so that she doesn't get the power of all of that. And yeah, COVID has made everything worse and more difficult. And we're going to draft a new constitution under COVID. And we're managing, because we're doing it, but we just had to postpone our elections. They were this past weekend. We're not having it in a month. So we're just going to have to do it, but it's difficult. And people are just too worried about how they're going to eat, how they're going to pay the rent, to be worried about how the new constitution is going to be. So it's changed the priorities, and that's really sad, because the country was very aware of what was happening, and they were close to it, and they were following it. And now people are just trying to survive.
I understand. Thank you so much, Margarita. And now I think we go back to Grigor with his answers. Grigor, please go ahead.
Regarding to the extremist movements, unlike many European countries, in Armenia, religious extremism, for example, is not a thing. Here, well, we talk also about political radicalization, that this is a phenomenon, especially now after the war, when the society is very polarized. Armenia was very badly defeated in the war against the dictatorships, obviously, and a lot of issues and concerns come up, and a lot of very far right political groups are trying to tap on the worst human instincts, actually. A lot of calls for changing the government without elections, committing political crimes or killings, which for which are are not that many in our society, which happen only, I don't know, a couple of times in the past. But luckily, this type of extremist ideas do not enjoy the massive support, and I'm very happy about that. Anyways, following this political crisis that is caused by the COVID-19, but also the consequences of the recent war, there will be snap parliamentary elections in June this year. And I am very much hoping that populist movements and extremist ideas will not gain any popularity and any place in the decision-making structures. Now, when it comes to the Nina's question, which I really liked, about this two hats that I'm having in the local government and in the NGO. Well, I'm not involved with the national government, right? I'm not a public servant or whatsoever. I am a head of an NGO, but at the same time voluntarily working as a councillor in the city council. That's a not paid paid job. That's a community office where you basically you are elected to volunteer for your city, to have not necessarily political agenda, but also solve a lot of social issues related to social affairs, housing, smart city, green areas, public spaces, etc., which I really like. These are issues I care about. But of course, this is also a political role, and you're always identified with politics. So it's been difficult to navigate and be credible as a civil society activist and also as a politician on a community level. Our organization is trying to be unbiased, and very often we also issue very let's say hard statements on in a hard language, addressing both local government and the national government, and I'm trying not to bring the politics into the organization. And I'm not a partisan, so I'm elected as a part of a coalition of certain parties and individuals. So this also helps me to avoid party politics. I'm not involved in the party decision-making processes. And also the areas where I work, education, youth and social affairs, luckily are not that political. As a non-partisan person, I'm always careful with very political and very, how you call it, contesting and laws and legal acts, for example. So my main job is in the civil society, and I'm trying to push this expertise that we have here and the best practices into this government structures, which are rather slower, less effective, and need to undergo a lot of reforms. This is not very much appreciated by the local government, actually, because they are used to working in a certain ways. And anytime you come up with an idea of a reform or of a change, they don't really like it because they have to go out of the comfort zone, right? This is exactly why the revolution happened, to push them out of their comfort zone. They have been living in this comfort zone for the last 30 years. And the leading majority of the vote. So this is also one of the ruling coalition, more leverage.
Grigor, I think Yeah, I think your internet
bring
is,
change maybe internally.
yeah.
Can you hear me?
Now, yes, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I think you had a problem. I think it was the last thing you said, so maybe you can just repeat that. But otherwise, we heard you before that. Yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just was saying part of a ruling party, it is probably a bit easier to impact an internal change. Just the ways and the methods that we do it are a bit different from what we have been doing when we were in the opposition. But we are trying to work internally to bring those changes. I am also very outspoken and critical on the current government and the local municipality that I am actually part of. Because I have the civil society background, so it's a lot of free speech.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. The last thing was that we heard that was that you are critical, and I'm sure that that's like the main thing that makes you different from the other maybe members of the council, and but also the other NGOs that are following the topic. Yes, we're a little bit over the planned time, but I think that we had a wonderful discussion, bringing into perspective several different but yet similar experiences, I would say, and also ways of youth inclusion and how young people are sort of building their way to effective inclusion and effective participation within decision-making processes. Margarita and Grigor, I really would like to thank you for your participation, for everything you've shared today in this discussion, but also in the process of creating of the topic and everything that we prepared for today. I'm really sorry that Lala and Syed couldn't make it because of reasons they couldn't affect on. And yes, I would like to thank to all of you that you've been following this discussion and also participated with your questions and comments. So yes, thank you once again for your time. And I hope that we'll get a chance to discuss in some of the upcoming opportunities.
Thank you, Stephanie.